Hello and welcome to this special edition of Global Thinkers, charting the course Sino-French relations at 60. For the first time in nearly 5 years, Chinese President Xi Jinping will pay state visits to 3 European countries, with France being the first leg of his tour. 2024 marks the 60th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations between China and France. 60 years ago, Chairman Mao Zedong and General Charles de Gaulle made the historic and courageous decision to establish ties, opening the door to exchanges and cooperation between China and the West. But in a world of increasing anti-globalization and right-wing populist forces, can China and France relations maintain that original spirit of bravery and wisdom? How can the two countries strengthen and deepen cooperation in a fractured and destabilizing world? And how far can France go to pursue its strategic autonomy? And what is China's role in this endeavor? Join us for our discussion today from Beijing. I'm Qinduo. Joining me today are Song Xian, founder of Sinvo think tank and former policy advisor at the European Parliament. Cui Hongjian, professor with the Academy of Regional and Global Governance at Beijing Foreign Studies University. Arnaud Bertrand, French entrepreneur. Mondial Bechari, author and CEO of Mandax. And Philippe Legault, senior fellow at the Asia Society Policy Institute, Center for China Analysis. Well, welcome to this special program. Hongjian, we'll start with you. Of course, in January, Chinese President Xi Jinping hailed China and France relations. He said, quote, over the past 60 years, China-France relations have always been at the forefront of China's relations with Western countries, bringing benefits to the two peoples and contributing to world peace, stability, and development. What do you make of President Xi's remarks like this?
I think President Xi pointed out this importance and also value for these bilateral relations between China and France correctly. Also, both China and France, they are major players in the international relations, and both of them are the member of the Security Council of the United Nations. So they take a very, I think, important responsibilities to help not only this stability for world and regional situation, and especially they need to do something more to promote this recovery for world economy. And for the past 60 years, we can find that stabilization is a very important characteristics for these bilateral relations, because for both two countries, they are different in a political system or some other, but indeed they respect with each other. I think it's a very important experience, not only for China and some other countries, especially between China and Western countries. So this kind of strategic importance or value, I think it gives a very important condition for both China and France. They can take the first group, especially in the relations between major players in the world.
Major players in the world. Mondial, 60 years ago, basically that's a time of Cold War. France basically was part of the, the Western camp led by the United States.
Yes.
And China, more or less, were friends of Soviet Union. Of course, there was a division over there. And the two countries, went to each other. People would say that's a move beyond the logic of confrontation between different camps. What do you make of
Correct.
that? 60 years later, when we look back, people would say that's courageous,
Correct.
that's a brave decision.
Yes. Correct. I think to get back to what my colleague has mentioned, it's important to look at things historically speaking and to really understand this kind of like consider one of our Confucius approach, but also somehow traditional French approach to the time, to the long term, right? When you talk about the different camps, as you just mentioned, when we were referring to a bipolar system where Soviet Union and the US, it's important that France was trying to carve itself out without falling into the trap of ideologies. And this is why the keywords of pragmatism and a certain, let's say, willingness that was led by Charles de Gaulle was to actually trying to not align, but ally with the US in this way allowing another opportunity for eventually, ultimately, developing somehow a more multilateral approach to how the global arena was and is still trying to get there today.
We'll quickly forward to what we have now, relationship between the two countries. Arnold, how do you characterize the current ties between Beijing and Paris here?
I would characterize it as a ray of hope in a world increasingly divided. France is openly saying it refuses to see a world defined by the US-China rivalry and wants to assert its strategic autonomy. China, on its side, is saying that it doesn't want the rivalry in the first place, and you have effectively both countries putting their money where their mouth is on trying to forge a relationship that's not defined by this US-China rivalry. So in a way, just like France was the first Western country to recognize the PRC in 1964, maybe France today is one of the first Western countries, at least the first major Western country, to recognize the legitimacy of the PRC in a post-unipolar world.
In a post-unilateral world, that's an interesting point. Song Xin, I also want to have your opinion about, how do you look at the relationship between China and France, against such a large background as, Bernard mentioned earlier?
Well, I still think that there's a big and even tremendous potential in this bilateral relationship, not only just in the area of trade, but also in the area of technological cooperation, education exchanges, people-to-people exchanges, and also political level, high-level dialogues at different, at national, regional, and even local level as before. Because I think there are three stable pillars behind the Sino-French relationship. The first is the political, the second is the trade, and third is really the social. And I think all these ties are still very stable, and we should continue to explore the stability and the potentiality of this pillar instead of abandoning them. And the second point I want to point out is beyond all this traditional cooperation area, today we have also AI, we have also quantum physics, we have also other areas such as not only telecommunication but internet platform, where we can also rebuild this kind of mutual trust in order to boost further this economic and technological cooperation.
Well, Hong Jian, Chinese analysts like to use words like steady and far-reaching, words like this, to describe the relationship between China and France, when it comes to, big events between two countries. But how exactly have these two nations been able to consistently find consensus, and common ground probably on some specific issues on the global development, for example? And how do you, comment on, let's say, the commonality between the two countries?
Also, both China and France, those two countries are also, has a very long history for very traditional, culture to support their independent policy. Also, self-respect, I think it would be a very, very important features for both two countries. At the same time, I think not only just at the very beginning, 6 years ago, both two countries realized that they need to take some more responsibilities to support or to, facilitate this called the strategic stability on the global level. I think now we are living a little bit of similar situation now. Now we do face a kind of a challenge between two different forces. One of them perhaps try to draw this world into a so-called new Cold War. And another, I think both China and France, they try to play a more constructive role to help the world and to keep this strategic stability. So I think that on this regard, now how could those two countries to find out a more common ground? I think that to have a similar worldview would be very, very important condition for this. For example, now both China and French leaders, they realize that now we are living, perhaps, we are living in a new world order, perhaps in the form of multipolar world. So how could we find out the format to, or even the rule to support this forthcoming multipolar world, which means the multilateralism? So we do find out a very, very strong consensus between two countries on this multilateralism. At the same time, how could we support this situation is we need to have some economic policy also to support the opening up and also marketing economy and some other. So I think on this regard, especially for this trip by President Xi to France, those two leaders will try to recall this very, very strong voice jointly on, for example, to keep the strategic stability on the global level and to find out some more political solutions for any kind of geopolitical tensions. And then, of course, on bilateral relations, especially economic and trade issues, they try to find out more constructive solutions and to avoid any kind of tensions like a trade war or something other.
Let's move on to take a look at, of course, what kind of a role the European Union is going to play around the world. Of course, President Macron has been calling for strategic autonomy. Here, we have a clip by the president in the recent speech, talking about the challenges and talking about unity. And he used some very serious words, of course. Let's take a listen.
We have to be clear about the fact that our Europe today is mortal. It could die.
Elle peut mourir. Elle peut mourir.
It could die, and that depends solely on our choices.
Bâtir une Europe.
Building a Europe that can show that it is never the vassal of the United States of America, and that it also knows how to speak to all regions in the world.
Parler à toutes les régions du monde.
Arnold, I want to have your opinion on, President Macron's remarks. Of course, that's very impressive. He used some strong words. Europe could die. What does he mean?
Well, I listened to that speech, and I've listened to Macron many times over the past few years say that he doesn't want to be a vassal of the US and he wants strategic autonomy. And of course, I applaud this rhetoric. I want strategic autonomy for France too. I want, a sovereign France and a sovereign Europe that is able to make decisions based on its own interests.
So, mon Dieu, so there is an issue, like probably we need action to match those words.
I think we have to look at it. What is trust here? If we look at it from a local perspective, from a European, let's say, nation perspective, yes, European Union doesn't have war, but it has tensions, if not micro conflicts. That means that the figurehead of the countries often play the homo politicus. So basically, they try to send all the signals in order to, as Macron says, en même temps, which means basically to play both side of your head, but not really having anything, let's say, coherent, right? The example of the Gaza is a great example. But does it mean that we have to categorize what the president of France is? No. I think we have to look at it from a theme perspective. And the theme perspective is that it doesn't matter what people have been feeling. Pragmatism, other economic issues is the core reason of any kind of pseudo tensions. Then we kind of try to put a narrative on top of making France this kind of developing world, third world advocate in the West. But it is true that in the past few years, there has been under Biden especially, a much more Atlantis American stance. So we go back here. How can we be effective? What and how can we translate those words? Well, we do have to say that we have to compare. So France is the only one in the past few months, in the past year, that has taken that strong approach to try to reinvent a common security defense policy, which has been the European Union goal, but has been failing because of three different stances. Whether it's a kind of neutral, I don't know what I'm doing, whether it's a pro-Atlantis stance, which is American stance, or whether it is a much more independent Gaullist stance. But we can say that France is trying, through Macron, for different personal reasons, to be that flagship. And that is just enough as a signal to see how this is going to attract to attract traffic, and see if this can concretize, economically speaking, first. If this concretize in any way, whether it's for China or the developing world, maybe the teeth will start to grow, and therefore maybe we can see if effectiveness is on the table.
Well, Songxin, if you look at this strategic autonomy, or largely, what they say mean in a similar direction, this is not the first time the president make such a call. How do you look at this pursuit of strategic autonomy? Autonomy, of course, in terms of defense, we understand that. What about other areas? Also autonomy here?
Right. I think, the Russian-Ukraine conflict actually was a wake-up call for the whole European Union, because in terms of energy security, in terms of energy stability, actually the EU relied on Russia for so many years, from actually the middle of the Cold War even. So right now, this reliance just disappeared. It means like the EU and especially countries like Germany, like France, they need to strike to achieve this kind of energy autonomy via other paths. So that's why they are going through this energy transition. So they can actually start to continue to develop their renewable energy spectrum in order to continue to supply the union in a more stable way. So this aspect should be also taken into account, which means beyond actually the military autonomy, the energy autonomy. But also there's other aspects, such as technology-wise. I mean, right now, if we see EU-China relationship becomes somehow the extension of China-US competition, is because the EU has never made its own position, leading position in technology area, in a lot of areas such as AI and quantum physics. And these are really the key area in the future. And if the EU wants to achieve certain autonomy, let's say technological wise, they need to have a very stable partner. And China should be one of these partners that EU is looking for. So these are the things I think we need to take into account.
Well, Hong Jian, from the Chinese perspective, how do you look at this pursuit of strategic autonomy?
I think to a large degree, to get a kind of strategic autonomy now for most players in the world should be a goal needed to pursuit. Now we are talking a lot about so-called the change of international order. What does that mean? Which means that more and more players and economies, they try to find out their own rights to have some more sustainable development. I think on this regard, for both China and France, we can get some more common grounds. I think that this strategic autonomy not only for France and for China, which means that we need to have our own rights to have our own policies, and we need to have our own partners. We could not just find out the limitations more and more, just living in a international order, limited by any kind of unilateral measures or policies by United States. Also, that even France, as one of allies with the United States, it has been suffered a lot from this kind of unilateral behaviors by American government, by United States. So I think now it's time for both China, France, and China, some other European countries. We need to take a very serious rethinking about what's our position, what's our interests, and even what's the common interests between China and Europe, between European countries, and especially for the whole international community.
Well, Philip, we are talking about strategic autonomy. We're not talking about probably in a less sense, dependence or mutual dependence on each other's market or certain material, for example. Speak of that, if there is a return of Trump to Washington, to the White House, will that somehow probably spur the Europeans to pursue more, let's say, with more interest in terms of autonomy there?
There is no way that Europe and the United States will completely cut links or things like that. There are just too many deals going on, business deals on both sides. Actually, there's a lot of European investment in the US as well as American investment, tourism. All of this is happening. But on the other hand, if a Republican president was to certainly switch courses, and perhaps on big issues. We haven't mentioned the Paris Accord on climate, for example, which is something that obviously leaders will be keen to discuss in a few days. And we all know that President Trump, during his first term, decided to quit that accord, which had been signed by his predecessor. So if that was the case, if international trade or international governance were to be questioned by Trump, that would obviously raise more than an eyebrow in Europe. It doesn't mean that Europe would necessarily switch to another ally, but it would certainly strengthen perhaps the view of the French president that was re-expressed a few days ago. And I think to a certain extent, Emmanuel Macron's vision has been enhanced by the facts, by the various conflicts we have in the world, including in the Middle East, including in the east of Europe, including in Africa. And Europe needs certainly to mutualize some of its resources, some of its defense equipments, procurement, this kind of thing. So I think we're going to head towards this. And a number of countries, particularly in Eastern Europe and in Northern Europe, are now much concerned about the risks coming from the outside of Europe, including close to our borders. And this is something that is going to steadily move forward.
Mm-hmm. Well, outside risks. Arnold, I want to have your opinion here. During the meeting with his visiting, this is the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, of course, talked to his French counterpart recently in April. Wang Yi said, the facts, quote, have proven and will continue to prove that China is an opportunity, not a risk to Europe, a partner, not an adversary. End quote. Is this message well received?
At the end of the day, I think that a truly key problem that we have in Europe and in France as well is a big lack of knowledge and understanding of China in Europe. Simply put, Europeans know quite little about China. They don't know China's history. They've never been to China. They've never seen a Chinese movie. Most of them have probably never even spoken with an actual Chinese person. So there is that fear of the unknown, which means that China can say we're just normal country. We don't want to we want to be a partner, not an adversary. That fear of the unknown is there. So in order to see China in a different light, in a more accurate light, I think it's absolutely critical to work on that, on really develop people-to-people exchange, cultural exchanges, the teaching of the Chinese language, all those efforts to demystify China and to ensure that people in Europe have an understanding of China that reflects reality. And actually, interestingly, I think that's something that China and France are speaking about. For instance, I know that the president of the Figaro Group, which is a big French media conglomerate, was in Beijing a few days ago, and certainly speaking about doing some collaboration with Chinese media in order to deepen understanding of both countries. So I think efforts to that effect will be are badly needed in order to see China for what it is.
See China for what it is. Sung Xian, you talked about the huge potential for the two countries in different areas, and on one area, this people-to-people exchange. How much more we need to do, probably, in your eyes, like to strengthen this relationship. Basically, we have talked about this all the time. Increased understanding, easier said than done.
Yeah, right. I totally agree. I think people-to-people exchange changes actually can be the future key pillar of the bilateral relationship, because based on my own experience. Like 15 years ago, when I was a graduate student, I was admitted by 2 French elite schools, and it was that year the 45th anniversary of this bilateral relationship, and the French government issued quite some scholarship to help actually Chinese students to finalize their studies and research programs abroad. And I was so lucky that I became one of these people. And then I realized, like, by living and studying in France, I realized like how connected actually the two cultures are. Both of the people, they have really admiration of their own historical heritage, and they have some shared actually habitude, I would like to say, and they also have this kind of admiration for the other countries as well, such as poetry, such as film, such as art. So I think that kind of experience, like among students, among researchers, among the business people, can really be the cornerstone of the future bilateral relationship. And these people can really serve as the, I would say, the buffer zone, like in the future, in order to counterbalance this kind of drawbacks at no matter geopolitical or geo-economical level. So I think that is really key. And what we should do, I think we should restart to invest more in this kind of research program, exchanges program, to invite more French students to come over to work, to study, and to do short-term or long-term this kind of programs, and to just to have fun with the Chinese students. And we also should encourage more Chinese tourists actually to explore France as before. I mean, Paris used to be the most, I think, popular destination for Chinese tourists abroad for long distance, trip. But right now, of course, after this COVID period, France no longer actually the most popular destination. I think French government should invest more also in trying to promote like the French as France as a destination.
As a destination.
Right.
Yeah. That should be the case probably. Mondia, of course, we are talking about this, strategic autonomy, relationship of people-to-people exchanges. Of course, because we can sense, the uneasiness or sense of uncertainty, sense of insecurity for different countries, yes. From different parties in today's world. People discuss this is a new Cold War. So, but globally, European Union, France, China, the United States, the rest of the world, probably we should do more to increase, let's say, exchanges, understanding, of people-to-people contacts.
First of all, going back again and again and again, economy, right? Understanding the interdependence of economy. To which extent, yes, we can develop it into green economy, into AI, into again, this is a maturity of economy. But if the economic aspect is much more multilateral and much more multi-layer, then we can start to really think and approach things clinically and not just emotionally. We just mentioned here that we are trying to understand this kind of like new world order. I don't think we have an order yet. I think we're trying to find an order, but I think order is very relative. What kind of order are we referring to? Is it an economic order? Is it a political, ideological order? Is it a temporal order? I think again, order, it's power dynamics. And the power dynamics, how do we assess them? Is it linked to what kind of like team membership do we have, or according to GDP thinking, or tomorrow according to a green economy ratio and our relationship or environment? Let's categorize things step by step. Let's have a let's say, assessment to which country we're referring to. If we talk with Africa, we should not talk from those like first world, developed world issues. I think we have to refer to infrastructure, industry, and first or second level of economy. If we're talking of a country like China and France, yes, then we can talk vision. Yes, we can talk about environment. Yes, we can talk about spatial, aeronautical projects, etc. And then we can break it down at every single level of society, educational, people to people, etc. But we need a structure, and that structure needs to be highly pragmatic. To be pragmatic, we need to understand the macro and the micro level of which part of the world we think, and according to the part of the world we think, what are the dynamics that influence or uninfluence a specific stance, right? If we talk about the US, we have to understand the politics, which means what? Which ideologies are going to lead? Are we going to be more nationalist with Trump, which is actually can be better for Europe, because Trump is not not into this approach of like having Americanism and liberal world ideology that will be spreading according to a normative stance. So maybe that's a better opportunity for Europe. Maybe is Biden better for Europe from an ideological standpoint? Yes, but from a pragmatic standpoint, I don't know. So let's be careful and let's try to approach things categorically, carefully, and multilaterally, again, if we want to use that keyword.
Well, let's move on to take a look at economic aspect, economic and trade between the two countries. Now, here are some facts and figures about China-France economic and trade relations. France has become China's third largest trading partner in the EU, with a total bilateral trade volume of $78.9 billion in 2023. It is also China's third largest source of actual investment. Meanwhile, China is France's largest trading partner in Asia and the seventh largest globally. So Hongjian, I want to have your opinion. How do you look at this overall trade and economic relationship over the past 60 years, until today? Pretty strong, I would say, relationship here.
Always, as we know, the economic, trade, and even industry cooperation take a very important part for this bilateral relations between China and France. Even usually we take some more focus on its strategical part for this bilateral relations. But undoubtedly, this economic and trade cooperation gives some more dynamic and also even the fundamental support for this bilateral relations. I think the more important thing is now it's time for both countries to find out the joint grounds to support a kind of opening up policy and to oppose any kind of protectionism. As you know now, the European Union is investing some Chinese companies for EVs or some other. So I think it gives a little bit of shadow for this healthy and sustainable cooperation economically between China and Europe. So now I think it's time for France as a major economist within European Union to find out some more common ground with China, say that, okay, we should refuse any kind of protectionism. Even, yes, now both France and some other European economies, they are facing some problem, as we know, the high inflation, some other. But now it's also a very critical time for both China and the EU and France to find more common grounds. Because as we know, for the past more than 40 years, both China and Europe, both China and France, we are the beneficiary for this globalization. So we need to insist on some principles. Even, yes, we are difficult, but now I think it's time for us to show our more, encouragement and more bravery to continue something.
Song-Xin, you have been providing advice for big companies, either from France or China, doing business in the two markets. China is the largest trading partner for more than about 140 economies around the world. Of course, more globalization, more trade. But of course, there are concerns from the French side. So, how do you say to these? Probably they have expectations kind of different from both sides.
Right. If you look back at the history during the past 40 years, at the beginning there were a lot of French investment in running into China because actually they reallocate their factories to China because China we had quite some low-cost laborers, and from here if we assemble or manufacture goods we can export to the globally, right? So I really think actually French companies benefited a lot from that part during that 10 to 20 years. But then there was furious competition because some local players and also players from Germany, from the US, and they joined. And then somehow some French company, such as I would like to mention the Renault or Citroën, and these companies, they withdrew from Chinese market because of the lack of the competitiveness, not because of the the other factors that the others would like to mention as a local protectionism, right? So So this is very natural because that is a business world. So in the business world, the rule is like this. So you have to always improve your competitiveness rather than the other factors. And then in the I think from the 1990s and earlier 2000s, there were a lot of French chains such as Carrefour or Auchan. They came into China and they became very competitive and they took a lot of market share. But then later we have Alibaba and who developed locally some very reliable and also very efficient actually supply chain. So then Carrefour right now also took a step back, and so they withdrew most of their business in China. So I think that is also this kind of natural development. We cannot say like because of the local protectionism. So then they force actually the French actually companies to drop the Chinese market. So right now I think we are entering into a new phase where there is a little bit less this kind of complementarity between the Chinese and the French actual business world. There is a bit more competition, not only for Chinese market share, but for global market share. So if we take example of automotive industry, I mean, all the French marks, French brands, they are competing like furiously, like globally with the Chinese brands, not only in Europe, not only in Asia, but in also South America, also African, right? So I think right now we are not afraid of competition, I think, for most of the French and the Chinese companies. What we really fear is we are setting up all these barriers in order to decrease actually the possibility that the European companies fail. And I think that is not healthy, not only just for the global market or the global consumption, consumers world, but also for the French companies, for the European competitors. If we take the example of solar panel like industry in Europe, I mean, 12 years ago, the European Union imposed quite a high level of tariff to Chinese solar panel export to European Union. And then what happened? Did actually the European Union, the industry, the solar panel industry survive? No, actually not. Right now, Europe is one of the biggest market for solar panel, this industry for the products, but they only produce 3% of what they need. They import largely from China because they increased very largely this tariff at the beginning without thinking the consequences. So they ruined actually the industry within the country.
Basically, protectionism is not necessarily the best answer to competition, let's say.
No, definitely not. So right now, even though there are some investigation towards the Chinese EV cars, I do not think that the EU will continue this kind of approach to increase largely the automotive actually tariff. Instead, I think they want to create this kind of negotiation actually room in order to say like, of course, we can have this kind of open market for Chinese products, but we have to set up certain other barriers and in order to make sure that
joint ventures.
Right, exact. So right now there is a turning point because 30 years ago, when the European companies coming into Chinese market, they have to create joint venture here. But right now, I think Chinese brands or Chinese manufacturers, when they expand their business in Europe, they need to adopt that approach as well in order to have a better branding or better or more sustainable actually approach locally.
Yeah. Well, Arnold, you are an entrepreneur. You do business in China. Of course, you know we have heard of this the talk of de-risking, basically. Decrease probably investment or Chinese investment in Europe or technology transfer, things like that. Of course, the subsidy investigation, for example, into the Chinese EVs exports. What do you make of these efforts? Will these efforts work, to meet the goal of the European Union, for example, to develop their own EVs?
Well, first of all, I think this rhetoric is actually very damaging to the relationship, and often it's almost like already on double speak. So if you take de-risking, for instance, do you really remove risk when you single out your largest trading partner as a problem and launch hostile actions against them? I would say you actually create more risks when you do that. And I don't know a single company that deals with EU-China trade that isn't very worried by the new geopolitical risks that's being created with this type of rhetoric, like de-risking. So I think there is a way of doing things in a smarter way for Europe, in a non-confrontational way. For instance, it's understandable that the EU is afraid of, getting flooded by, cheaper EVs, for instance, or is afraid of being solely reliant on China for some strategic goods like maybe medicine. But then, you can put in place non-discriminative policies that, if we take the example of medicines, you can say, we need to stockpile some medicines, or say that the most critical medicines need to be produced in Europe. That's a sensible, non-confrontational, and non-discriminative type of policy. But when you just point out China as a whole as a risk, and that you need to de-risk from, because they aren't like-minded, like you often hear from Ursula von der Leyen, for instance, I think is just very counterproductive, and it belongs to the domain of ideology, not the domain of sensible policy making. My colleague was saying earlier, she's on protectionism, she's 100% right, I think. Often protectionism is, might sound smart in the short term, but it kills your local industry in the long term. And China is a good example for that. How did it develop its car industry? Was it through protectionism? Not at all. It actually opened its door to Western car manufacturers like Tesla or BMW or Volkswagen, or even car companies when we were still competing in the market. And it learned from that, and thanks to that competition in China, it learned how to become very competitive on the world market. And now that it can, export and become, as it is now, the first exporter of cars in the world. So there is a key lesson from that in Europe. Maybe we should, take a bit of a deeper look at how China did become so competitive, and how can we, what lessons we can draw from that in order to regain our competitiveness ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Well, Mondir, in your opinion, what should both sides probably do? Instead of building barriers, probably, or deglobalization, or reduce the trade, that ultimately will result in the loss from both sides.
I do have to mention a few things about protectionism in Europe. It was not like, it's not about they didn't know or they knew what they were doing. I think it's a little bit naive to think so. Any economist, any common sense will say that we need to remove any kind of barriers. Again, my stance is that we should go case by case. If we use the example of the car, the EV, etc., I think what China has, and it's not about the car itself, and it's not about the technology itself, it's that they are highly experienced in developing this lithium battery whatsoever technology at a level that it transcends what anyone wants to think about. Because the more we become interdependent, first of all, it reduces the cost for any parties, but also it forces the hard reality of what we call cooperation, but it's not even cooperation. Let's be honest, it's survival. It's not even cooperation. So if you approach things from a realist perspective, it is about surviving. And surviving is where and how can I get the best component of how I'm going to create my economic system, right? Mm-hmm. So case by case is one way to look at it. Second of all, is to keep going with finding new sources to avoid the dependency into a specific sector of economy. The power dynamic, it is from the developing world, unfortunately, because the demand and the market, but also today the technology and the advancement for specific countries, where we talk about here, etc., kind of like overtakes. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you, Mondia. Thank you, Arnaud and Philip, Sungxin and Hongjian. With that, we come to the end of today's show. Many thanks to our guests. Again, you can also find us on the CGTN app on YouTube. I'm Qinduo. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.